My name is Marian, and I'm here joined by Matteo Gubellini.
Hello.
We are both founders of SoftComply. I'm the CEO, and Matteo is our regulatory affairs manager. And we also have Monica, whose face is hidden, but who is our customer success manager that most of you probably have talked to already. So most of you probably know a little bit about SoftComply. So I just tell you very shortly that we started almost 6 years ago with the idea to help medical device startups to kind of fasten and then make it more affordable to automate their compliance and get their innovative products to market. And of course, the second goal that we had was to integrate everything to software development lifecycle tools, and for that we chose Atlassian, Jira, and Confluence. So as you probably knew, a lot of the medical device companies were using Jira on server and Confluence on server until Atlassian said that there will be no more server and made the small medium-sized companies move to cloud platform instead. Now, cloud is secure in Atlassian, and they have worked hard for the last 3-4 years to make it also work for the regulated industries, which was quite challenging at the start, but they have kind of gotten there. The one thing that was missing was actually validation. So you need to prove that the software tools that you're using for medical device development or product development and quality management system are validated or integrity is checked regularly, which is particularly difficult for cloud because the changes are happening every day, and you are not notified what changes exactly are going to take place and when. So in order to help medical device companies to actually stay on Atlassian and use the cloud products, we developed something that would help you and automate that validation, because it's just impossible to do it manually every day. So we will talk today about, we will start today with kind of the theory of what is validation exactly, what regulations require validation, and how you can manage it, and then we look into the software validation or Confluence validation, and how you can use our validation app for Confluence Cloud, and what do you receive as a result of running tests on the app. So Matteo is going to walk you through the theory and show you the app. And as I said before, please feel free to write down all the questions either in chat or in the Q&A. And we will take those questions as we go. If they are kind of detailed and short to answer, if they are generic and require more discussion, we will address them in the end of the webinar. Yep, I think with no further ado, I give the floor to Matteo, who I think has some slides. I don't know, you can share the screen, right?
Yep.
Okay. All right.
You see my screen? Okay.
Yep, it's working nicely.
So there'll be two aspects Marian mentioned. First of all, we'll talk about generically about the validation principle, and some of you may already be very familiar with that. And then we'll give a look at specifically how this can be automated in Confluence Cloud. So the regulatory framework, so in the requirement to validate processes in general, it can be found a bit everywhere. It is in 1345, in 416, that talks about software use for quality management system, and 756, that is the generic process validation. Same thing for 21 CFR 20.75 for process validation. And then more specifically, 21 CFR 11 for electronic records and electronic signature, which in the first clause says that the system shall be validated. The US provide much more guidance and information regarding how to approach different validation, process validation, software validation, tool validation, and so forth. Whereas in Europe, like outside the US, the guidance is a bit lighter. So Typically, people used to use the general principle of software validation final guidance that covered both software product and software tools. And the process validation, even at the higher level, general principle and practices. As of September, then, we have this new computer software assurance for production and QS software guidance, which is still draft, but it is a very good document that basically branches from the general principle of software validation and gives more details in terms of software assurance activities that can be used to prove that the software is fit for use. So it's not going to supersede anything, but it's more detailing of how software can be validated. It's not incredibly long, and I say at least half of it, almost half of it, it's about examples. So I think it is quite useful if any of you wants to give a look at it. So what is validation? Terms of validation actually have different meaning depending if you talk about product, if you talk about tools, software, processes. Using the definition of the FDA, so validation means confirmation by examination and provision of objective evidence that the particular requirements for a specific intended use can be consistent for field. So here is more about product. Process validation means establishing by objective evidence that a process consistently produces a result or product meeting its predetermined specification, which, although it talks about process in general, it is more similar to what people typically understand for software tool validation. In plain words, is demonstration that the software reliably does what it's supposed to do by objective evidence. Okay, so at the end of the day, this is what you have to prove, and this is what you have to show with the validation process. What are the approaches to validation? Now, I'm here, and here it's a very high level guidance, and part of it is actually taken from the new guidance of the FDA. And here it talks about all the tools that you have, not just one, okay? And not cloud necessarily, could be in premises, could be any type of software tool. So first of all, you need to create a list of all the software tools that your company uses and their intended use. Okay, and this is very important because certain software tools are very flexible. They can do so many different things. They have a lot of functionalities, but what are they exactly used in your company? It is unlikely that you use everything. Thinking about Confluence, you're not going to use every single feature of Confluence. You're going to use a handful of them, and typically companies tend to use always the same one. Now that you know what they're used for, you can do an impact assessment to see what the impact is on the medical device and the quality system if something goes wrong in the software tool. So if they can have an impact on the quality of the device, like in the broader sense, then the validation may be required. If instead they do not have any impact, validation is not necessary. In this case, we're talking about, I don't know, software that manages email, software that manages like a business or financial aspect of the company that have nothing to do, that they don't relate to any type of requirement of 1345 or any other regulation. And then you can actually break it down, and this is also recommended, to break it down by features, especially if it is, as we said, a tool that is particularly broad. Not all the features are rated the same, and not all the features have the same risk. And there's no real particular guidance here in terms of how many functionality do we break it down or not. It's if you're familiar with the software development, it's like breaking down a software architecture into units so that some of them can be de-risked. Okay, same identical thing. If there are just a handful of functionality and features that are really critical in this software tool, then it is probably best to separate them and do a kind of a more thorough validation in this aspect and be a bit lighter on everything else. And then you have to assess the level of effort required based on the associated risk. Of course, the higher the risk, the more activity you should be doing. And then business as usual. You create a plan, you have your risk assessment, you have your requirements, and then on the other side of the V, protocols, results, and a report. And this doesn't really change dramatically. The type of documentation is always the same. It's more about what type of activities you plan to do in the protocol, but also outside purely testing. And that's why the guidance is titled quality assurance, because it goes beyond pure testing. And then we have the typical, afterwards, when you complete the validation, you have a periodic review to make sure that nothing has changed that can compromise the integrity of the validation. And of course, if there are changes, you have to reassess whether revalidation is required, and if so, what type of effort. Typical regression, nothing particularly different. Now, let's talk about more specifically about cloud-based tools and their characteristics. What are the characteristics? So first of all, they are always managed by external organizations, whether they are called the cloud, the software as a service. There is somebody else who manages them. You may be dealing with the content, with the permissions, with the day-to-day activity, but the infrastructure is managed by somebody else. In the case of Confluence, it is Atlassian, for example. And changes to the tool cannot be opted out, and this happens specifically for the Atlassian tools. When you get when Atlassian decide to push a change, you will have to adopt this change at a certain point. You can't opt out. There are release tracks, so in some cases they can give you a couple of weeks of notice telling you that they are going to implement a certain type of change, so you can prepare for that, but you can't opt out. Now, of course, this one here is not this point is less than ideal for the validation. But at the same time, think about the security aspects of a software tool. And you've seen what's going on now with the server version of a lot of tools, that every time that there is a vulnerability coming out, things can get really serious. I've known a lot of companies that have problems with their server version of Confluence because it was not up to date. So it is actually to your advantage, and it makes sense that the manufacturer, the developer, Atlassian, who knows exactly how the system works, implement these patches as quickly as possible. But still, you have this issue that you will be in a position where you have to control suppliers that are not necessarily using the MedTech requirements and are much bigger than your company. Again, Atlassian are pretty big, and you cannot audit them. They won't let you audit them. And you will have these unexpected and uncontrolled changes to the tool. Now, Atlassian is a pretty solid organization, so they're not going to do random things, but still, you can't claim that they're perfectly controlled. So what can you do about that? So you need to think about a strategy, and this is where the quality assurance as a whole comes in. You have external activities that you can trigger, so you can assess the change management process used by the tool developer. If you have access to it, or you have any information, you can review certification credentials of the tool developer. Atlassian has a lot of them. They can notify you of certain changes. If you subscribe to the release tracks, you will be notified of the changes and the reporting of bugs, vulnerability, and issues. The fact that they have reported to you, although it's not great that they exist, but the fact that they are reported, considered, and managed, it is something that, especially the FDA, looks at it very positively. So, because this is a serious organization that will deal with these issues. And then you have internal activity that are proper to the, or closer to the validation. So is there any user check? Can the user see if there is an issue with the tool? Will an issue or a misbehavior of the tool be captured? And then you can have additional process controls, but this is more for manufacturing process, inspection, measurement, and so on. And then testing, of course. But the problem with the test is that you test something today and it's not going to be the same tomorrow. So you can do it manually to, at periodic intervals, repeat certain amount of tests, but it's not practical for any type of company at any level, or this testing / self-testing of the tool. And this is something that even the FDA mentions in some parts, that this is something that you can take a credit off if the system checks its own integrity. And this is we come in, we've been on it for a few years, thinking on how to manage this problem, and eventually we managed to put together this validator that at the moment is for Confluence Cloud only, and it runs a certain number of tests. At the moment is once a week. You can't run them up to once a week. A certain number of tests, 47 at the moment, but this will increase with time, and it tests the core functionality of Confluence. Some of them are very light, some of them are very complex. It will check if you can create, edit, save a page, things like that, but it also can check if you can export a space and then recover it. So it's something that, if done automatically, saves you a lot of time. It creates a test protocols and creates test results for each test run that will be in your Confluence with a lot of screenshot and evidence, with the timestamp as an evidence that the test passed and the results were as expected. And what happens in case of failure? That we, as SoftComply, we are going to be notified of this issue. We are going to triage it and figure out exactly what's going on. And this could be something that is related to Confluence changes, small things. For example, and it has happened in the past few weeks, we have seen that they move a button, they change the name of a button or for a link or an object in the page. And this creates a fail, but it's not a failure of the system itself. Or if we realize that it's something bigger, then we will involve Atlassian. But at least we will let you know what the outcome is, and if you can, then it will be up to you to decide how you want to manage that. And then, of course, once this is fixed, you will can run again the system or the validation to see to have a clean run, basically. So it is pretty simple the way it runs. Now, at the beginning, there is some setup to be carried out, and this is something that we typically help with because as an example, we will need 2 dummy users, and we recommend that you don't use real users because we will need to test the permissions and the restrictions. So we need a user that is just a user, and we need a user that is an admin. This will be used only in the context of the validation, and then we will wipe all the information, but they will just remain here. So once you set it up, it's going to be just fine. And then, of course, you have to link it to Jira to make sure that we can check how the Jira macros work. We need the name of the author of this validation report. The system needs one, and then we have a token so that our system can access your instance, because the tests are run externally. We don't run them on your machine. We don't run them on the Atlassian infrastructure, but we have to do it externally. We have an external system that keeps on probing your instance and collects the result to then create a report. But once it is done, then it is pretty simple to run. You just click a button, then you go into the global page. And in this global page, you will see the list of all the runs that have ever been carried out. Okay. Now, we did a lot of runs here. We have passes, fails, partial passes, and so forth. Initially, it will be scheduled because our machine, we may have a lot of different customers asking to run this test. So we just schedule them, but it doesn't really take long. Now, the test themselves is about 10 minutes. Plus the time that it takes to generate the report. So it doesn't really take a lot of time, and this can be done in the background. So it's not that you have to stay here looking at the screen to see what happens. I mean, you can do it, but it is not necessary. People will not really see any difference in what they're doing. You may see a space that appears and then disappears, but that's the extent of what you will see, especially because we're using these 2 dummy users that are not real users. So in a second, you will see that it will start running the test. It will show you how many have ended, of which how many passed, how many fails, and how many have been skipped, because if we fail a test that is related to a certain behavior and this affects a following test, then we don't run that test because otherwise it would be a fail. We just call it skipped. And then the detail will show you what's going on in the background, when it is started, when it will finish, and then eventually when the report is ready, the link to the report, and the report will live in your Confluence. So I'm just going to show you just one of the latest that we run. We ran it a couple of days ago, I think. So first of all, as I mentioned, we will have the protocol. So this is just a list of tests with the details of what exactly the system is doing. And then the actual results. Now, this is the report. So the list of tests, pass, fail, skipped, and with the screenshot of the evidence with times. So not a lot of things to see here. It's just test cases with expected result and actual result, pass, fail. In this case, everything passed, but if there is a failure, you will see that the system kind of try to explain what could happen. But as Marion mentioned, we will be notified immediately and we'll start trying to understand if this is a serious issue or it's just one of the small changes that Atlassian keep on pushing, and that basically they've broken how our app tests the system. So, and that is basically it. I mean,
you can try out the app. It's a limited trial at the moment, so you can try. You will see all the tests of the 47 test cases will be written in the test report that you get in the trial mode. Only 10 will be run, and 5 of them will have the full evidence in the test results. But at least you will be able to try it all out yourself.
Yeah, we'll see how it feels and if it makes sense to you, and you will give a look at least you will see the protocol and you'll have an idea exactly of what things the system tests. So just I would recommend that you install it. It's free for a month, and like Marion said, you can see only certain result. But here, more than the results, what is probably interesting for you is to understand whether the type of tests are, if we are on the mark. Now we have a lot of experience in this type of validation, but it's just us. Okay, so if you have other ideas, opinion, requests, just please let us know.
So thank you so much, Matteo. And then we'd like to thank you very much for coming to our webinar. And you're most welcome to book a kind of in-depth demo time, and then we'd be happy to show you how to configure the app for you and how then to run the tests regularly. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you.